Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this short session for 30 minutes. Tim Baker's my name, and we're going to talk about job crafting today, and in particular, how you might go about it. And I'm conscious of the fact that some of you on this broadcast may not know what job crafting is, so I'm going to spend a bit of time running through what that is. I'll give you some examples of job crafting, and then I'll talk about how you'd go about introducing that in your workplace. So be patient if you were involved last week, because I would have gone through a lot of this material last week, but I think it's important that we understand exactly what job crafting is and what it isn't. So I just make that point before we go any further. All right, so those of you who don't know me, I'm an author. I've written 12 books. Many of the books are on leadership and organizational change and development. I am a keynote speaker. I run workshops around the world, obviously not lately, but certainly remotely at this stage at least. Hopefully things will get back to normal, and I hope you're staying as positive as you can. And in my spare time, I play rugby in the Golden Oldies competition here in Brisbane. So lots of things that I do, and just a quick overview as to who I am. Now, one of the objections that people may have with job crafting, and remember, job crafting's been around for a long time. It's not as if it just come up in the last year or two. In fact, it's been around for 20 odd years. But it's had a very slow start. And I think one of the reasons it's had a slow start is that it sounds like a good idea, but how can it actually be organized? Because if, what we're really basically saying in job crafting is to go outside your job description and not do exactly what is the literal requirements on the job description. And that might sound counterintuitive. So it's quite reasonable for people to wonder, how could this possibly work in an organization? Well, hopefully I can allay concerns about that in my presentation this morning. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the proactive paradox, which is ultimately the key point out of my latest book, Breaking the Proactive Paradox. I'm going to talk about job crafting, obviously, and in particular, I'm going to emphasize the application of job crafting, and I have a special offer at the end of this presentation for you. All right, so let's talk about what I call the proactive paradox. And of course, this word paradox is used a lot, and I think sometimes it's used when we could perhaps use other words, but the best analogy I can give is the chicken and the egg. So what comes first? Is it the chicken or is it the egg? And of course, that's a difficult question to answer, but a paradox can often be what comes first, this or that. And the proactive paradox is a similar kind of situation. Let me share with you what it looks like. So in the world of work, we have a situation where usually, and I say usually, not always, usually we have team members who come into a team who are very keen to be proactive, to show their initiative, to be autonomous, to use their common sense and their judgment in the right place at the right time in the right way. So most employees want some freedom in terms of how they might react to the circumstances in front of them, whether it's a customer complaint or whether it's, how something should be tackled that's a bit out of the ordinary. Managers also want their employees to show independent judgment. So really, the manager wants the employee to show independent judgment and autonomy. Again, prudent independent judgment and autonomy. And of course, the employee wants to do the same thing. So at the beginning of the relationship, both entities in the employment relationship are on the same page. So what actually happens? Well, what happens is that the manager may explain to their team one day that I want you to show independent judgment. I'll back you. Go ahead, make your own judgments on certain situations. And that's the rhetoric. So the manager makes that comment in a team meeting. And the employees basically sit there and just think to themselves, they don't say it, of course, they think, I wonder if he or she really means that. I'm not convinced that he or she really means that. So I'm going to play it safe and just follow the systems and the processes and just see what happens. So the employees sit on their hands, and the manager notices this. The manager gets a bit frustrated with the employees because the manager thinks to themselves, well, why aren't they showing their independent judgment? And because the individual isn't showing independent judgment, their team members, that is, the manager decides to jump in and fill the vacuum. And so they jump in and do the work that they're expecting employees to do. And while the manager's stepping into the arena to do that, the team member is sitting there thinking to themselves, aha, I knew that they didn't really mean that. I knew that they didn't really want me to be autonomous and show independent judgment, because if they really did, they wouldn't be jumping in and doing my work for me. And so what it does is it confirms in the mind of the team member that my manager wasn't serious about what they said in that team meeting. And therein lies the proactive paradox. So it's a communication breakdown, basically, and it's a misunderstanding about people's roles and responsibilities. This goes on in all sorts of organizations, all sorts of industries, and it happens right across cultures. And this paradox is really problematic. And I think that job crafting offers a real opportunity to break the proactive paradox. It's only one of many ways I discuss in my book, but I still believe it's one of the best ways of breaking this paradox. So summing up, there are three basic stages to the proactive paradox. The first stage is agreement. That is, the employee wants to show initiative and the manager wants them to show initiative. So that's the first stage. Both agree. Then the employee is skeptical of the manager's rhetoric when he or she says, I want you to show initiative. So they sit back and they don't jump in. And the manager notices this and decides, excuse me, and decides to jump in and do their job for them. And this confirms in the mind of the receiver, that is the employee, that the manager wasn't really serious about this in the first place. So this is the paradox that I talk about in my book. So let's talk about job crafting. Now, I shared a couple of examples last week, so bear with me and I'll share them again with you, because I think the best way to explain job crafting is to give you a couple of examples of what it looks like in reality. So I'll just read this through and just think about this from a job crafting perspective. The first thing I'd say, though, before I read it through, is that all of us are subconsciously job crafting anyway. And it's just human nature. So when we come into a job, what we tend to do is we favor the things that we enjoy, and we perhaps not so much avoid the things we don't enjoy, but we probably don't put the same effort and attention into it. So it ultimately means that by the end of our term, say, for example, if we're in the same job for 2 years, the actual job itself has changed because it is very much favoring the individual's strengths and preferences. So let's think about Paul here. Paul works in IT and customer support. He spends most of his time on the helpline, but has a passion for testing and improving new software. Through discussions with his manager, Paul joins a group that tested new applications before they're launched in the company. This took up about 3 hours every month. While Paul's role didn't substantially change through job crafting, he was delighted that his skill and passion for analysis of new applications was being recognized. So there's a very simple example of job crafting. And what it means is that because Paul has a passion in a certain area and his manager's supportive of that passion, he's been given an opportunity to branch out into that passion, but it doesn't substantially affect the job that he's doing. So when you think about job crafting, there are 3 elements to it. So if you think about it, you can job craft around the tasks that you do. So ultimately, if you look at your job description, there's usually a series of key result areas. and key performance indicators. And these are the tasks that are expected in the job. This is the most obvious form of job crafting because it's very apparent to everyone around them that somebody is crafting their tasks. So this might mean taking on new tasks, such as Paul. It could mean delegating those tasks to somebody else in the team, or it could be modifying the way those tasks are being done. Now, relational crafting is to build relationships up with other people within and outside the organization that help that individual do their job more effectively. So relational crafting is about crafting relationships or new relationships that might help that person complete their job more effectively. So, for example, if you're an internal service provider and it's very obvious that you're not getting a cooperation from many people within your organization for the services that you provide, it might be prudent for you to go out and build relationships up with key stakeholders within the organization as a way of being able to influence them to take on board the services that you provide. So that's the second type of job crafting. And it's the third one, of course, is cognitive crafting, which is perhaps the most interesting of the three, because with cognitive crafting, what you're actually doing is you're shaping the way you think about your job. So if you see yourself as just a truck driver or just an accountant or just this or just that, it's quite different to seeing yourself as somebody who might have some influence in terms of the way people do things. And I'll give you an example, a very good example of cognitive crafting very shortly. So, of course, a lot of things that are associated with job crafting may incorporate more than one of those things. So basically, you've got three dimensions to look at when you're job crafting. Let's have a look at another example of cognitive crafting, which I've just mentioned. So we have Harry, who's a bus driver. Now, he sees his role as more than being a bus driver. He decides to give helpful sightseeing advice while traveling his regular route from the airport to the city. He's mindful that many of his passengers are from out of town, obviously new to the city, and Harry perceives his job as more than driving a bus, which is, of course, what I've been talking about around cognitive crafting. By using his extensive knowledge, local knowledge, Harry decides to use his extroverted personality to good effect. He decides to add sightseeing to his primary task as driving a bus. So Harry sees himself as more than a bus driver. And that, of course, is the essence of cognitive crafting. But he's also decided to add a little bit of flavour to the trip from the airport to the city, which is normally mundane, I'm sure. And he's able to give people a little bit of an indication of what happens in the city. So he has obviously incorporated that task. So you could argue he has applied cognitive and task crafting to his role. So I think that if you're thinking about your workplace and you're thinking, well, where would I start job crafting? I think there's probably three groups or special employment needs, three groups that I would probably focus on, because I think these three groups benefit the most from job crafting. So the first group is older employees. These are people close to retirement who've got a lot of experience and a lot of breadth of knowledge that they can share with the rest of their team members. But because of the role that they've got, mentoring may not be seen as part of their role. But their manager might encourage them to take some young employees under their wing and to show them the ropes, so to speak. And so therefore, they're encouraging the employee to, spend time sharing their tacit and explicit knowledge with new employees. So they certainly have a lot to offer, but sometimes I think this is an untapped resource. So there's certainly a group open to job crafting. And from my experience, most older employees are quite willing and able to share their knowledge with younger workers. And so if there's a license to do that, they would certainly do that with relish. Another group is employees with disabilities or health problems. Now, people who've got disabilities and health problems, of course, are somewhat hamstrung by what they can and can't do in the workplace. So we need to accommodate those health problems and disabilities by giving a person another perspective on how they might do their job. So this would be a group that would definitely be open to job crafting, and it's something that needs to be discussed between the manager and the team member. And of course, parents with young children, particularly female employees, are, obviously work-life balance is a critical issue for them at that time. And so it may well be a group that has special needs that requires job crafting in order for them to continue to make a contribution to their workplace, but at the same time, of course, look after their young children. So there's three groups. I'm not suggesting that they're the only three groups, but if you're thinking about where to start, that might be a good place to start with those groups. Here's another example of job crafting, and I'll just read that through if I may. I shared this last week as well, and I'll share it again here because I think it's quite relevant. Marilyn is an architect who specialises in designing offices for large companies. She goes out of her way to organise several informal meetings with her clients on a new office design project. During these meetings, Marilyn, instead of looking at the current office layout, observes the way people are working and how they interact with one another. After several visits, Marilyn changes the office designs based on her observations and interactions with the customer. So obviously, Marilyn doesn't see herself just as an architect. She sees herself as obviously somebody who is in the business of providing a conducive, productive workplace, and she wants her designs to reflect that. So clearly there is a component of cognitive crafting there. But of course, because she takes time to actually talk to the people that work in that building, she's obviously using relational crafting as well. And by her conversations with people, she can incorporate some of their ideas into her designs. So that's another example of job crafting. But of course, if Marilyn didn't see herself as more than just an architect, she may not feel comfortable to engage in those conversations with her customers. So that's where cognitive crafting comes in. So let's spend a little bit of time now talking about how you'll go about this. Now, essentially, there are four different stages or steps, if you like, for job crafting, a job crafting program to be effective in the workplace. And each of these stages are critically important, and they all build on each other. So the very first stage is you need to train or educate the workplace as to what job crafting is and what it isn't. So obviously I'm doing that today in somewhat in a abbreviated version, but you need to provide some training for people to understand how it works and what it entails. And more importantly, what the benefits are for the individuals, because people will do things for their own reasons. And of course, because this is an employee-initiated exercise at his job crafting, so that's where it comes from. An individual has to decide themselves what can be job crafted. This is not a manager dictating to an employee that they must job craft. So we give everybody training, and I would suggest that you're probably looking at about a 2-hour window there. This can be done online, or it could be done face-to-face in groups of people across the organisation, talking about the concept of job crafting. While people are sitting in that workshop, they're also thinking to themselves, I'm sure, about how they could actually alter what they do in their work. Because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is to tap into the strengths of people and their preferences. So in other words, this is very much focused on helping employees engage more with the work that they do and to be more effective in the work that they do. So we do the training across the organisation. By the way, if you're interested in applying this, just make contact with me and I can certainly do this for you. I certainly facilitate the process at least. So once everyone has done that, they're now sufficiently knowledgeable and aware of job crafting. The next step is that across the organisation, everybody then completes a time log. And the time log I normally use at 15-minute intervals. And this can be done either the old-fashioned way, paper and pencil, or on a computer. So it really depends on the nature of the work that you do. And it's a bit of a pain in the neck. It's probably the least stimulating of the 4 steps. But let me point out to you that if you don't do this step, then people are just making guesses. I mean, for example, if I said to you, and it's Friday, if I said to you, what have you done this week? Well, of course, you'd be able to tell me a few things, but you wouldn't really be able to give me any sort of detailed explanation of what you did. So it's extremely important that we get a record of this, even though it's annoying, but we want people to record what they do for a week. And you might say, well, why a week? Well, normally anything that happens in a week. And if you extended this out for 2 weeks, it's probably too long. And if you only did it for 2 days, it's too short. So a week is a good unit of time to do this. So everyone across the organisation, regardless of what their role is, and that includes managers, it includes everyone, is there to record what they do in 15-minute intervals for a week of work. All right, now that is hugely important because step 3 is that you then facilitate a process where those individuals come to a workshop. And I would suggest the best way to organise this is in the teams that they're working in. And I'll explain why in a moment. And then I would ask people to, or I'd invite people to consider looking, they look at their time log and to record where during the week they think they could have spent more time doing this or less time doing that. In other words, I want people to, based on data, to go back and actually make some judgments about how they might have job crafted. Now, remember, there are 3 elements to job crafting. So it's not just the tasks that people do that I want people to concentrate on, although that is an important part of the process. I also want them to concentrate on, their communication channels, who they've been talking to during the week. In other words, I want them to concentrate on relational crafting. And I also want them to think at a deeper level about why they do what they do. So in other words, can I change the way I think about what I do? Is that going to be helpful for me? And is it going to be helpful for other people? So we have a reflective workshop. And as I said earlier, I think it's best to organise this in teams. And the reason for that is that if I decide to change something, if I've looked at my own log and I decide that I perhaps should change and alter something, it's going to have an impact either directly or indirectly on those closest to me, that is the people in the team. So part of that workshop is actually giving people an opportunity to share with other people what they're considering. And the reason for that is it gives people a chance to talk about its impact on the work of the team. So that's why I do it in a team environment. Now, of course, it'll impact on other teams as well, but I think the first and foremost, it needs to be discussed with the team itself. So once we've made some decisions about some areas that can be job crafted, and remember that it's not about changing the world, it might be just a few things here and there that need to be altered, and that's the employee's judgment. The fourth step and the final step is actually to sit down with their manager. And so this is a series of one-on-ones with their manager, that is the person they report directly to, and to talk about what their plans are for job crafting. Now you might say, well, why does the manager need to know? Well, remember, the manager's got some skin in the game. They've got some input into this. And it's a good idea to talk that through, because the manager has to be across some of these things. And he or she might foresee some issues or problems with some of the plans that people have got in their team. So it's sort of an opportunity to talk about those things. So once there's agreement there in these one-on-one discussions, the next step is, of course, for the employee to go off and start to job craft. And you know, there's probably a fifth step there that's important, and that is to come back to the manager and feedback what's happening, and to receive feedback from the manager too as to how they're traveling in terms of job crafting. So this can make a huge impact. And when you look at engagement levels in the world of work, I've seen them as high as 70%. So if people are disengaged, 70% of employees are disengaged. I think one of the real reasons they're disengaged is because we're trying to fit square pegs in round holes. So we're giving people jobs that, you know, in some cases they're not necessarily suited to, or they have to follow a particular template. This gives people an opportunity, an escape, to change and alter their duties and responsibilities to better reflect who they are in terms of their preferences and their strengths. And that's why it's highly effective. So folks, I'd like to just share with you, and if you're not aware, every Friday I have one of these sessions. Next Friday at 10 o'clock, I have another session on another of my books, Winning Teams, the 8 Characteristics of High-Performing Teams. And what I want to focus on there is managing stakeholders for better team outcomes. All high-performing teams are very good at stakeholder management. So I wanted to share with you a couple of tips that will help in terms of how you might go about that. You'll receive a copy of the slides and the recording today, and in that, of course, you will get a link, as you can see down the bottom. So you're more than welcome to join every Friday, or the sessions that you would prefer to join. There's what's happening next Friday. And finally, I'd like to just do a quick plug for my book, Breaking the Proactive Paradox, Maximizing Performance Through Empowerment. This book will be available on sale in, I believe, November the 1st is the date I've been given by the publisher. But if you would like to pre-order a copy, you can get a discount from me, significant discount. So my price today is $30, whereas if you purchase it, you know, through the normal public channels, once it's out, it'll probably be $40 inclusive of postage. So if you order it today, $30 plus postage, all you've got to do in order to get yourself a copy is just to send me an email at tim@winnersatwork.com.au. Do that by the close of business today, and I will talk to you about that. And I will then sign a book for you personally, and I will send it out as soon as it's hot off the press, so you'll get it before anybody else in the public gets it. So there's a special offer for you. Take advantage of it, and I hope you do. So folks, that's it from me. So thank you for your engagement today, and I hope that that's given you some heads up about how you can apply job crafting more effectively in your work. And look forward to catching up with you next Friday. And if you'd like a copy of the book, just send me an email and we can arrange that for you. So thanks everyone, all the best, and have a wonderful weekend, a restful weekend, and hopefully we see you again. Thank you and goodbye.